The following audiobook poses questions, watches what unfolds, and sits with what remains as its answer. If I may ask, don't try to understand anything. Just take a look. Listen without filter. It should be made clear that no one wrote this. It's not an idea. It's like a bird flying by or a storm drifting through. It belongs to everyone and no one. This is exactly why each volume will be free. There's nothing to understand, and yet everything to witness. Begin from the place of, I really don't know, and from there you may notice much more than the one who says, I know. The Missing Link, Volume 1, by Sunya Aham, Section 1. Question: Am I separate from ego? When one observes the world, the way we speak, the way we live, it becomes apparent that human beings all over the world feel separate from. We are lonely. We are isolated. We are out for our own ambitions. Occasionally we come together and seek comfort or pleasure, but the majority of our daily lives is spent pursuing and attaining our personal desires. The experts tell us, it's your ego which creates such a selfish, materialistic way of living. They say, be free of your ego, defeat your ego, overcome your ego. But not enough so-called experts steady themselves to the degree that they are free to wonder what it is they are even saying. What is ego? Who or what is supposed to free me of it? The word ego means the self, that which feels, acts, or thinks. It is another word for I. So what? So since it is now clear that ego equals I, what is truly being conveyed by the sentiment, my ego? The further one goes into this, the more necessary it becomes to clarify what one is referring to when one even uses the subjective I or my. And so one asks, seriously, what is I? Not who? When one refers to oneself, what is it exactly one is referring to? A name? A title? An object? An experience? A hobby or interest? A symbol? All of these have the potential to change over time. Therefore, who? Oneness cannot be a static entity. Throughout one's life, if one is looking to grow, build, and be a dynamic human being. And so the traditionally obsessed over questioning of who am I loses all meaning and logic. Essentially, one is always referring to things in one's past which one has identified with. So what? So I is an accumulation of one's past. What is the past? The past is time, which means necessarily I is a subjective symbol for time held within the brain as a memory within the individual. And so when one refers to self, one is referring to the past. Without the past, one has no reference point for self or me. So what? So I equals time conjured from the brain through memory into the present moment. And what is memory? Memory is thought. One cannot have any new thoughts. Anything one can think of is, however absurd or bizarre, only doable in relation to what one knows, has experienced. So what? So I equals time, which equals thought. Therefore I is a thought. So when one says you must control your ego, making of ego a separate entity within oneself, they are missing a fundamental point which, when noticed, turns that statement into a completely illogical fallacy. The ego is you, I is ego. There is absolutely no separation between me or I and ego. It is one movement of thought. And so when this is not noticed, what takes place? One then tries via different practices, theories, and concepts to dissolve the ego. But this is nonsensical. Why? I equals ego equals thought equals time. It's all one thing. Practices, plans, theories, or methods all take time to implement. And so the plan to dissolve ego is an abstraction of thought, which can only act as a sustainer of ego, necessarily. And so the illogical nature of such a proposition is revealed. The ego, the constituent which one seeks to rid oneself of, abstracts itself and calls itself I or me. So then, essentially, one is saying, I, time, must put a plan, take time to dissolve my ego. Ego equals me equals time. And so we structure the need for change around the notion of time-based principles, which one will discover is antithetical to fundamental radical change. And further, since time is a measurement, it has inherent limitations, and so time which is thought is limited. Therefore one's plans, thoughts, for change are inherently limited and doomed to spoil, whether in the near or distant future, thus creating the world we live in presently, wherein people may change incrementally on superficial levels, but by and large do not radically change on a fundamental level. So then one says, so what do I do now? Equals thought equals time equals ego, meaning there is nothing to do about it. This is to be observed, and in observation without separation, one sees in one's daily life, moment by moment, all the fallacies of self, and as the false is revealed, one ceases to see oneself as a small separate entity who must battle the world, and instead notices that the whole universe is one, and therefore is able to move, intelligently, with that fact made clear. This does not mean everlasting bliss, smiling 24/7, or anything some snake oil salesman or guru may try to sell you. Far from it. Intelligence is, literally, the art or skill of discernment. So intelligence is knowing that emotions are not good or bad, but rather like clouds passing through the human organism indiscriminately, to the degree that one truly sees. This is to the same degree that one can live free of the past. Answer: no. Now, let's continue this thread with another question. If you're interested, sit with me. Let's look together. Question: what is meant by the question, who am I? Once it is clear that I is an abstraction of thought conjured from the past, projected into the present, the age-old question of who am I, or the statement, know thyself, takes on a fundamentally different meaning, because at this point it has been noticed that the entity which seeks to know itself is an abstraction of thought, the past, so that which is observed presently would then be unendingly distorted by thought, time. And so when there is no seeker called me, what is there to be observed? The human organism is a natural creature of the universe. Therefore we are no more special than the flies, the dogs, the trees, the fish, the ocean, or the stars. All are distinctions of energy. These distinctions are necessary for daily living, in the same way that words are necessary for communication. But one must be clear about the fact that the symbol word is not the thing itself, nor is the human distinction, with all its capacities, sufficient grounds for superiority. And this is the human fallacy. What makes us feel so special is the idea alone. The idea, conditioned and or inherited, that one is fundamentally separate from. So what does all this mean? It means I is dissolved not through practice but upon reflection. As stated previously, it's all energy. Therefore everything is fundamentally one thing. So what? So everything, everyone is a mirror. Therefore only distinctions, no separation. So what? So the wars, the bickering, the gangs, the tribes, the nations, the organizations, the politics, the groups, the cliques, the classes, the races, all fundamentally stem from the idea of being separate from. Stems from me because what a culture or society is in conduct is directly and necessarily related to the internal perceptions or framework of the individuals of said culture or society. One creates a nation or a group in order to feel more secure in the world. But this action, birthed from an individual whom in oneself is divided, necessarily creates global insecurity. You, Z versus them. And so one may ask, what does the word individual mean? Individual means indivisible or inseparable. Apply this literal meaning to the way we actually live, and one notices a startling fact. We are not, in any true sense of the word, individuals. So what is a true individual? A true individual can no longer identify with all the fractions, because this one would have noticed the devastation the fractions have brought on the world, and upon observation of the fact would be completely dissolved from any group identification, which means necessarily dissolved of any deeply ingrained sense of me or self. A true individual is a whole human being, period. Humans, as we grow, are constantly obstructed. As a child, our natural expressions are obstructed by the external parents, school, etc. Then once that nonsense is conditioned, we become our own obstructions due to the limitations of an identification with thought, and so we get in the way of our own flowering, natural growth. There can be no natural growth for the human being if thought is not put in its right place in daily living, and so the question, who am I, or the statement, know thyself, actually points to the intelligence of nature, and it is thought, the idea of me, which distorts said intelligence into an ideological quest to find an abstract and static entity, that which does not exist. And so further, it is revealed that what is paramount is not finding self, but understanding nature. Answer: who am I is a distortion of the question, what is one's nature? If you'd like to sit in silent contemplation after seeing all this, I'd understand. When you're ready to keep going, I'll be here. The last question of Section 1 is next. Question: what are the constituents of fundamental radical change? With all our technological advancements, are we any more intelligent than the caveman? We still have wars, vast inequality, neglected environmental issues, and deal with normalized psychological, physiological dilemmas. We seem to change superficially, but we still struggle in ways that truly mock our supposed sophistication. Anyone seriously interested in finding out if there is another way to live must inevitably come to the following question: what are the constituents of radical change? It would seem, upon observation, the constituents for radical change are urgency, choicelessness, and energy. Without these, there can be no fundamental change for the human being. Urgency is wholly lacking in the actions of the common human being. When one believes they have time, one generally procrastinates. Though many will attest to being able to accomplish a task when one's back is against a wall or a deadline is present, this rather simple observation reflects the fact that where there is time, there is no radical sense of change. Therefore, in regards to radical change, a sense of urgency is law. However, this urgency to change is systematically conditioned out of the average human being in favor of a rather insidious passivity. Choicelessness is fundamental because it is the one who has choices, who must then take time to make the right decision. And further, the attempt to make the right decision allows for indecision or regret. And so in a land of choices we see people who are also riddled with anxiety, the like of which has many reasons, but is not inseparable from the mountain of choices laid before the individual today. Energy is also a law, unavoidable constituent of radical change, since one requires energy to do anything and everything. And though we seem to have endless energy in the pursuit of our pleasures, somehow that energy dissipates upon the challenge of responsibility. The constant and ignorant dissipation of mental, bodily energy is destructive to all aspects of life and necessarily related to the degenerative ways in which we conduct ourselves at present. And so it is to the extent that this is seen in depth in one's daily life that one can actually approach the challenge of radical, fundamental change. Answer: urgency, choicelessness, energy. We've come to section 2 of this audiobook. The first section was all about the questioning of I. This next section is all about the questioning of we. Let's move slowly together and look simply. Ready? Question: what is one's relationship to the world? From this point on, one must now be clear about the fact that I is the actual root of division and struggle among people all over the world. And so one then asks oneself, what is one's relationship to the world? As touched on in the previous passages, one is not separate from. So what does this mean? Though we are not an amalgamation of morphed together bodies, beasts, and flora, we are still all of the same source. One must be careful with the word source. It is not meant to suggest a God or a higher power, rather to say that the origin of energy is the same, therefore making all distinctions of the earth one. And so all organisms have the same fundamental purpose: maintain itself, the environment, and reproduce. And so what does this mean? Human beings go through much trouble to find purpose and meaning in life. But the search for meaning seems absurdly unnecessary. When one's nature as a social creature is taken into consideration, and one is disillusioned of I, then meaning is obvious. That we would spend our time in communion, learning, and proliferating intelligence in the next generation is no meaningless way of living. What is meaningless is the way we spend our daily lives out for our own ambitions. What is meaningless is the pursuit of sex as a movement in pleasure. What is meaningless is having a child regardless of the environment or culture said child will have to inherit. What is meaningless is finding security in jobs we merely tolerate. What is meaningless is endless consumption to fill a bottomless void within. Might it be the case that we seek meaning, not because life itself is foggy on meaning, but because we conduct ourselves with selfish pursuits and know nothing of our nature? And further, meaning is revealed in direct relation to conduct, and so it is to the degree that I is eliminated, dissolved, seen for the danger that it is, that one truly notices meaning in one's daily life. And so in uncovering all of this for oneself, it is revealed that this radical perception in a field of darkness has the capability to illuminate another way to go about living. And so it is not about confusing this clarity with enlightenment, or thinking that one must save or change the world, a fallacy born of I. Rather, in negating the degenerative ways in which we conduct ourselves, one acts without persuasion or coercion as a mirror for all those who care to take a look. Answer: one is a mirror. To truly see the next question is to see something integral to being. Care to take a look with me? Question: what is one's relationship to sex? Sex, arguably humankind's greatest pleasure. What is one's relationship to that action which, in depth, allows one to temporarily escape from the devastation that is our daily life, that pastime which seems to bring one closer to an ideal state, the communion which creates a reiteration of what came before? Upon reflection, sex seems to have become the god of the people. To question what role sex plays in our lives and land on an answer that is not almost entirely liberal in the political sense, one is seen as a bit of an oddball or conservative. One can hardly go a day without considering sex on some level, or hearing someone else's subconscious dreams of it slip out in otherwise non-sexual conversation. Some go as far as to make it the only thing they get excited about speaking on. And so the most serious of inquirers must come to the question, why? On one level, it is obvious that we are animals. Our cousins of the animal kingdom partake in the action, and we are no more special than they. However, it is worth considering the fact that basing our most sound reason for having endless amounts of sex on the fact that we come from animals who do the same points more to our lack of evolution than anything else. And so one wonders if evolution has any other intention for the human animal. Or are we to lay as often as possible for tomorrow we die, so to speak, taking the actual way in which we live as the starting-off point for the inquiry into sex's place in one's daily life seems to be the most reasonable place to begin, and it is on this ground that one can inspect what is, as a result of sex being the god that we have made it out to be. When one looks at the way we generally live, is it a stretch to point out that we live overly selfish lives? Overly selfish in the sense that a degree of respect for one's own organism is obviously necessary, and so beyond that point one seems to be definitively egotistical. Where does this sense of overt selfishness originate? With strong consideration of the eliminated I within the consciousness of humankind, does that also eliminate the notion of sex as a means to sexually self-gratify? No matter how one slices it, when sex is motivated by the desire to satisfy an urge, rather than reproduce an heir, or secure the intelligent proliferation of the species, the urge is satisfied by selfish means, whether it is a partner claiming to enjoy, sexually gratifying another partner, or gratifying oneself alone. The former would not be done if it were not one's own interest to do so, and if it does occur without desire, then obviously the selfishness lies within the other, not to mention coercion. In regards to the latter, solo play, though seemingly innocent and highly recommended as inconsequential, is possibly the second most selfish act compared to coercion. It is the solo sexual act, masturbation, which has everything to do with self, and nothing to do with social engagement, communion, or the continuity of the next generation. And further, as we live presently, the family is fundamentally deteriorating. It is no coincidence that what parades the media, minds, and screens of the people are explicit, implicit, overt, and subtle sexual images, innuendo, metaphors, and storylines. All of this raises the child with more consistency than most parents, and many parents do not seem to see clearly just how manipulated the child is by this sexual inundation. Also, what one must take into account is the rapid increase in immediate gratification in all areas of one's life, messaging, packages, goals, etc. It seems fair to point out that the incessant satisfaction of sexual demands leaves one not only empty, but yearning for immediate completion in other areas of life, due to a misreading of the inseparable nature of mind, body. In other words, that one depletes one's body necessarily, leaves the mind to folly in a void, and with this void prominent and disconnected from one's nature, society says, like the shady hoodlum in a trench coat with a wry smile, "Here, I got what you need, endless porn, junk food, movies, music, sports, parties, digital platforms, etc. These things aren't all bad in themselves necessarily, but one's relationship to them is consistently revealed as being objectively gross, and so it is obvious that this hedonism, which has been so viscerally normalized, leaves one to live a life empty of meaning, silence, and communion, the beauty of which becomes imminently apparent to anyone who has ever dared to question the disorderly culture which has raised us, which is us. And so when sex is seen without judgment, clearly for all of its apparently discombobulating capabilities, what place has sex in one's daily life? Although one would have to dig deep, and with determination, to notice another way to live, it is not impossible to discover works, books, art, scientific studies, dialogues via internet videos, etc., where the conservation of one's sexual energies is taken very seriously, and even proven to be of one's nature. Too many attribute the notion of this conservation to a religious or dogmatic ideal. But upon the discerning eye, sexual abstinence, conservation, transmutation, and/or retention need not hold such an ideological framework. Many even report anecdotal, yet unparalleled, changes in one's personal life, mind, body, placebo. One may holler, coincidence, screams another, but these, if one may point out, are often the words of one who has yet to reflect in depth on all the ways in which sex as a movement and pleasure seeking has affected themselves and those around them. These are the words of someone who has yet to question their supposed treasure chest of sexual antics, kinks, and experiences for fear that there is actually nothing but self inside. One may find it a bit uncanny that the word kink has roots in the phrase to bend backward or sink at the knees. One wonders if the very acceptance of sexual kinks has anything to do with the weight one feels so very trapped beneath due to the way we live. Semen alone shares with the brain a plethora of necessary nutrients. So what? So when one decides to indulge in orgasm, one is depleting the brain, the whole body, mind of nutrients. This can be found in studies, none the least important of studies being oneself. Daily living. It is not then an overstatement to point out that the rise in mental health disorders, physiological ailments is almost without question related to the sexual promiscuity. Our culture normalizes without a second thought, and so to see this relationship with one's own eyes. Mind, body is to be free of much unnecessary strife. And so what we are left with, are we not, is sex as a means of reproduction. And so what does that mean? Does this not mean that nature has so brilliantly made sex so inviting an action? Because the creation of a new human ought to be that meaningful an opportunity. Nature is exclaiming through the profound pleasure of sex, this act has purpose. We have within us the means to create a whole human, but we squander such intelligent biological technology, semen, unto a toilet or, as culturally appropriated, unto another person's exterior, as if the fluids are of no consequence. The devastation of all this is surely beyond words, yet this is how we live. And so reproduction is then seen for the tremendous responsibility that it is. Because then it is for the unborn child that we face our traumas and our selfishness. It is for the unborn child that we see to it that this earth is not separated by tribalism or debased to competition. It's for the child that we see the value in patience and prolonged gratification. It is the unborn child who will weep with joy for having been considered so enthusiastically long before conception. It is the unborn child who will, because of the responsibility taken on by those who came before, understand their relationship to the whole of humankind, and the unborn thereafter, since it would be revealed to all that what remains long after death is, not the name or the body, but the beauty or ugliness of one's conduct, which leaves a mark on the world long after perishment. And so, with complete attention to the unborn child, one refuses to leave behind the monstrously devouring pit of sorrow which awaits the child presently, in favor of what would constitute the child's ability to live freely. Not freedom in the end, but freedom from the very first breath. Answer: sex is for the purpose of intelligent and responsible propagation of humankind. We've gotten to section 3 of this audiobook. This last section is not about I or we, but about one. Question: what is immortality? The word immortal means deathless or unending. As touched on in the previous passage, what sustains after death? Of the body and names the beauty or the sorrow in the way one lived. Suppose a family member dies unexpectedly. The family, heartbroken, is left with a plethora of emotions, not to mention confusion. Let's say that a person lived a life of nonsense as has been described throughout these passages. Then what that one leaves behind is the result of their carelessness, all the things in life which required clarity. The hurts, the pains, the struggles, the confusion, the rituals, the pleasure-seeking habits, all of that is left behind by the one who lives a nonsensical life. And so what is immortal is one's conduct. What gets passed down through the tradition of the mind. Body is a way of living, and so what then is most important in life? Would it not be simple daily living? Habits, thoughts, behaviors, how we treat one another, how we treat animals or the earth. All this is that which is immortal. Look at how we have remained unchanged for generations. We are still violent, selfish, confused, fearful, rarely joyful without cause. Why? Because this is all we know, all we have been shown, and to see things in any other way becomes very difficult. We have technological advancements galore, yet we still do not trust our neighbors. We can fly to the moon, but some will never know a full meal or roof to call home. So what is left behind? The idea that we are separate from, that we must compete or achieve. The notion that there is such a thing as success, the pursuit of my ambitions. All this is our inheritance, and all this shackles us to a past which we can no longer stand. Hence all the many myriads of degenerative processes afoot. And so what is it to live a beautiful life, to live without obstruction and grow into that which a whole human being is? And this one is not supposing fundamental understanding of that entity, but rather pointing out that it is the whole human who lives beautifully, while it is the divided human who strives in agony. The whole human leaves behind notions of communion, security, and compassion, while the divided human peddles endless grief, shame, hurt, and fear. Answer: the beautiful or sorrowful actions of one's conduct. Sit with all this. Really sit with it. Inevitably, one begins to wonder, how do I bring this about? I wish this existed in the world. I'm becoming something through this text. The following, hopefully, dismantles all of that cleanly. Listen closely, and don't try to understand a thing. Are you still with me? Final section. No how. No utopia. No enlightenment. One may come away from all this thinking, how do eyes? Wouldn't the world be super if we built a utopia full of saints? I want to achieve a state of mind that overcomes all this nonsense. Though well-intentioned, all questions, statements, and adjacent phrases of this kind are improper reflections of what one has read. This is not an artistic piece. What one has pointed out is not a metaphor with open interpretations. The one who has pointed all this out is pointing at something in our daily life in the same way two friends walking together on a trail notice something together. One friend stops and says, "Look." The other stops and adjusts their attention to the thing, tree, bird, waterfall, etc. So respectfully, one must clarify for those who come away from all this thinking that one has propositioned a system, ideal, or an achievable state of being, since the question of how implies a system or plan in relation to radical change, as pointed out previously. How has no value. The principal action required here is nonjudgmental observation of what is without being separate from, and it is through this simple, yet depthful, perception that allows one the freedom to discard or negate what is false, in order to let what is true reveal itself effortlessly. One might imagine a flower statue, and upon a clear, unobstructed view of the statue, what a statue is, why it is, etc., the sediment crumbles into dust, revealing the actual, a living, vibrant, flowering organism. The word utopia literally means nowhere or no place, and so to aim one's energy at an ideal place to arrive is to aim at an idea conjured by I, which cannot be an accurate assessment of perfection, due to I's inherent roots in the past, making of one's envisioned ideal a distortion. So any utopian ideal is antithetical to actual good or peace on earth, and so further, since the good place, we'll call it, cannot be found here or there, it is yet another pointing to the fact that the present moment, not tomorrow, is all one has, and on the notion of enlightenment, when the word is boiled down, it essentially means clarity. Now, take that simple definition and hold it up to the absurdity one generally uses the term to mean. The serious discerner would notice how stupendously we have deceived ourselves, and so it takes serious intelligence to see clearly through all the nonsense of the culture and come away with something which actually has the ability to shine light on the vast darkness called our way of life instead of sustaining it further. And so, in this way, like one trapped in a cave, deep down in the belly of a mountain, clarity is a much-needed fire, and so the eyes are the fire to a world draped in black. One must be clear, do not make more of the word enlightenment than need be. It is as miserable to aim one's attention at an ideal in this regard as it is in relation to a utopia. One may have noticed all these, how utopia, enlightenment, are related to the illusion of time. Where there is a destination or a system, there can be no freedom. Since freedom is not over there, but present only, one could imagine a slave trapped in shackles of the physical and mental sort. Now, in regards to total and unbreakable freedom, is the individual free when the shackles are merely removed yet the mind remains bond, slavish, or is the individual free when they notice, understand with thunderous fury and flowering intelligence that they are no slave but a whole and capable human being? God, damn it! Words truly get in the way of all that has been pointed out. This is the human fallacy. Let all this rest. Come back to it if you feel to. Never treat it as gospel, and question everything for yourself. Be like the ocean or the wind on trees, my friend.